Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly gripping and tragic crime and breaking down the really weighty legal doctrines that came out of it. We are looking at a landmark decision from the Supreme Court of the Philippines. It's GR No. 235787, better known as the Manzanilla Parricide case. And honestly, this isn't just your standard true crime story. It's a fascinating window into how the justice system actually unpacks things like intent, influence, and conspiracy. I mean, think about it. When someone is murdered, who is truly to blame? Is it just the person holding the weapon, or is it the person pulling the invisible strings? Let's find out.
We're going to start in media res. Picture this. It's a dark, grassy hill in Antipolo City. There are three unsuspecting workers nearby, just trying to earn a living scooping out small amounts of cement in the dark, when they overhear these incredibly chilling commands. Yari na, bilis bilisan, baka may makakita. Translated, that means, finish him off, hurry up, someone might see. Literally moments after those words pierced the quiet night, a murder took place. But to really understand who said this and why they said it, we need to rewind the clock just a bit.
Part 1. The Night of the Crime. April 15, 2007.
So let's look at the timeline here, because it is absolutely crucial. This ambush was highly calculated. At 9:30 p.m., those eyewitnesses noticed three figures waiting patiently in a grassy area. It was a woman named Florenda, a man named Roberto, and a third, unidentified male. They just waited there, in the dark, for 30 minutes. Finally, at 10 p.m., their target arrives. The victim, Angel Manzanilla, steps out of a passenger jeepney. Just minutes later, a confrontation happens, a fatal gunshot echoes through the hills, and the suspects flee. What makes this timeline so important to the court is that it clearly shows this wasn't some spontaneous, heat-of-the-moment act of violence. No, it was completely premeditated.
Now, right before that fatal shot was actually fired, something incredibly brazen happened. According to those eyewitnesses, Roberto boldly walks up to Angel, grabs him by the shoulders, and delivers this shocking statement. "Do you know me? I am your wife's paramour." Let that sink in. Roberto then physically leads Angel into the darkness of the upper road. Seconds later, a gunshot rings out. Roberto comes sprinting back down the hill to Florenda, they hop on a motorcycle, and they just vanish into the night.
Part 2. Two versions of the truth. The trial.
As with any criminal trial, the judge has to weigh the prosecution's evidence against the defense's narrative. And what's really interesting here is the stark, undeniable contrast between the two sides. On the prosecution side, you've got independent eyewitnesses, bystanders who didn't even know the suspects before that night. They provided detailed, super consistent accounts of overhearing the plot and positively identifying Florenda and Roberto running away. But on the defense side, we just have Florenda's complete denial. She claimed she didn't even know Roberto and that she was at her store with her son when the whole thing went down. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. She never brought her son to the witness stand to back up her story. She relied entirely on her own bare word.
In the eyes of the law, an uncorroborated alibi is incredibly weak. I mean, it's virtually useless. The trial court ruled against Florenda because she totally failed to prove that it was physically impossible for her to be at the scene of the crime. Those independent eyewitnesses had absolutely no motive to lie, so their positive identification easily, and I mean easily, prevails over a bare, unsupported denial.
Part 3. Defining the legal concepts. Parricide and conspiracy.
First up, we need to understand the charge itself. Parricide. Under Article 246 of the Revised Penal Code, this applies when someone kills a close relative, which includes a spouse. And since it was an undisputed fact that Florenda and the victim, Angel, were married and had been for 22 years, by the way, the charge was strictly categorized as parricide. This is a super important distinction from standard murder because parricide carries a much more severe penalty in the Philippines. We're talking reclusion perpetua all the way up to death. Now, you might be wondering, wait a minute, Florenda didn't pull the trigger, Roberto did, so how on earth can she be convicted of the killing? Well, under the law, she becomes what's called a principal by inducement. To prove this, the law requires 3 specific steps. First, there has to be a clear intention to procure the crime. Second, the inducement has to be the determining cause, meaning the crime simply wouldn't have happened without it. And third, it's executed either by offering a reward or by using powerful words of command. Basically, the inducer has to exert this strong temptation or irresistible force over the person they're instructing.
We also really need to talk about implied conspiracy. This happens when 2 or more people share an unlawful goal, and their combined actions prove they are working together as a team, even if they are doing completely different things. You know, you don't need a written, signed contract to prove a conspiracy.
It's proven through the mode and manner of the crime itself. If one person acts as a lookout while the other person shoots, their personal association and shared purpose point directly to an implied conspiracy.
Part 4, the Supreme Court ruling. GR No 23587.
Okay, so let's see how the Supreme Court meticulously applied these exact definitions to Floranda's actions. First, they looked at her direct command, yarina, or finish him off. The court found that these words weren't just her carelessly venting her anger. They were an unequivocal, powerful coercion uttered in a setting specifically designed for a murder. Second, because Roberto jumped into action the second he heard her command, it proved Floranda exerted massive dominance and influence over him. Add in the fact that Floranda and her unknown companion stood guard as lookouts and then escaped together with the shooter. Yeah, the court saw right through it. And this brings us to the absolute bedrock of conspiracy law. The Supreme Court stated that once conspiracy is clearly established, the intent and character of the participation of each accused are irrelevant. The act of one is the act of all. Here is why this matters so much. Under the doctrine of conspiracy, ordering the hit and standing by as a lookout makes you just as legally liable as the guy who actually pulls the trigger. In the eyes of the law, you are all treated as one single entity. Part 5. The final verdict, judgment and penalties. So, what happened to the accused? While the shooter, Roberto, actually passed away while the trial was still ongoing, so his case was formally dismissed. That meant Floranda had to face the final judgment of the Supreme Court all by herself. Ultimately, the Supreme Court affirmed the lower court's decision, finding her guilty of parricide beyond a reasonable doubt. Since there were no specific aggravating or mitigating circumstances, the law dictates applying the lesser of the two indivisible penalties for parricide. Consequently, she was sentenced to reclusion perpetua, a penalty of life imprisonment that truly reflects the grave, devastating nature of orchestrating your own husband's murder. Now, in addition to prison time, the Supreme Court modified the financial penalties awarded to the victim's heirs just to align them with recent jurisprudence. So we're looking at 75,000 pesos for civil indemnity, another 75,000 for moral damages, and 75,000 for exemplary damages. They also awarded 50,000 pesos in temperate damages since no actual receipts for funeral expenses were presented at trial. And to cap it off, all of these monetary awards will earn an annual interest rate of 6% from the finality of the decision until they're completely paid off. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought about the true nature of power and culpability. We so often focus all our attention on the physical act of violence itself, right? The gun, the trigger. But this ruling forcefully reminds us that the origin of a crime often starts with a single, whispered phrase. Think about it. In the eyes of the law, who is more dangerous, the hand that fires the weapon or the voice that commands it? Well, the Supreme Court's answer is crystal clear. They are exactly one and the same. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.